Today, I'm covering the last 2 episodes of the first season. And I'm not going to waste any time. Let's get to it.
Those are the doors. That is a chair with a panda on it.
Washington, D.C., and you with it.
It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
It's tryout day for the Hoboken Zephyrs, literally the worst pro baseball team in the league. The team's coach, McGarry, played by Jack Warden, argues with the GM about the value of the day's prospects. The GM all but says McGarry will be fired if the team doesn't improve. Then they meet Dr. Stillman, who introduces them to a new prospective pitcher named Casey. Are all fictional baseball players named Casey? Casey watches a pop fly until it makes contact with his forehead. Unfazed, he then shakes McGarry's hand, or rather he half crushes it, as Dr. Stillman gives him basic instructions on human interaction. The coach then sends Casey out into the field. While the coach and Stillman watch him go, the doctor explains that Casey is a robot.
Why do you have to pick on me all the time? Huh?
Then, through a series of cute sound effects and sight gags, Casey proves to be a hell of a pitcher. Convinced of the lefty's skill, McGarry agrees to sign him, so long as his status as a Maschinenmensch remains a secret. This is apropos of nothing, but I looked up the actor who plays Casey, Robert Sorellis, and oh boy, suffice it to say he died in prison a couple of years ago, so not a robot. Also, it's worth noting that most of this episode had to be filmed twice, as the actor who originally played the coach, Paul Douglas, died of a heart attack the day after filming finished. And his performance was kind of weak, and you could kind of see that he was going to die in his performance, so they had to refilm all of that. Of all the Twilight Zone episodes to be cursed, I really didn't expect it to be this one. At the first game against the New York Giants, McGarry tells Casey not to be nervous, but of course, Casey doesn't get nervous. McGarry and Stillman then chat, with Stillman confessing that he'd already built a quote-unquote home economist, aka a housemaid, and that he was only doing this for the scientific curiosity of it all. One montage later, and the Hoboken Zephyrs are on track to win the pennant. However, after getting beamed on the field, Casey gets checked by a medical doctor who uncovers the pitcher's secret.
This man hasn't a pulse or a heartbeat because he doesn't have a heart. He's a robot.
The commissioner is called in, who rules that since Casey doesn't have a heart, he is not a human and cannot play in the MLB. They argue, with McGarry offering a sick burn to the GM.
How could he be human without a heart? Beasley hasn't got a heart either. He owns 40% of the club.
They all debate the definition of humanity for a few minutes, and Stillman suggests the possibility of installing a heart in Casey's chest, which would be just enough for the commissioner to consider him fit to play baseball. At the next game, once again against the New York Giants, Casey seems to be running late, so McGarry talks to the team as though their star pitcher was in an operating room fighting for his life. Casey shows up in the middle of McGarry's speech, leading to your bog-standard double-take.
Casey!
Casey has clearly changed, smiling and talking about togetherness, but McGarry isn't concerned as he sends the pitcher out to play. What follows is the most miserable defeat of the Zephyrs season thus far, and when McGarry asks why, it turns out Casey couldn't bring himself to strike out the other players. His heart just wasn't in it. So the Zephyrs don't get their pennant and eventually go under, but not before McGarry looks at Casey's blueprints and goes to Stillman with an idea to do something great with a pitching club out west. This is another lighthearted episode that is generally entertaining, if a little on the silly side. It's not really my cup of tea, but I do enjoy it for the performances and can't help but smile at the tone that just invites you to have fun with it. Of course, hearts don't actually work that way, and neither do robots, but whatever.
What's a pitch, Rabbit?
The greatest news in sports, Sam. There's 200 free baseball trading cards on Post cereals.
Tarnation, you mean like on Post Alphabets?
Yeah, and on 9 other Post cereals like Sugar Crisp, Post Toasties, and Grape Nuts Flakes. See? 6 free trading cards right on the back of the package.
Our final episode centers around the famed playwright Gregory West, who we meet in his house as he shares a relaxing moment with what appears to be the perfect woman. She pours him a drink and sits down next to him, and then Greg's wife appears at the window. She comes into the house and knocks on the office door, but when Greg opens the door, weirdly wielding a pair of scissors, the other woman is nowhere to be seen. Oh, so he's having an affair with Sue Storm. Mrs. West, Victoria, searches the office and lightly interrogates her husband, all while pretending she's not looking for the disappearing mistress. She even starts looking for secret exits in the walls. Eventually, she confesses to having seen another woman in his arms. Greg tries to laugh it off, and then she plays along for a little while until Greg accidentally lets the cat out of the bag.
Couldn't possibly be interested in such a drab, ugly little creature.
Oh, she's not so drab.
With Victoria understandably yelling at him, he tries to explain. He says that when he writes, sometimes his characters take on a life of their own. He doesn't mean that metaphorically either, he really means they come alive. Naturally, Victoria doesn't believe him and goes straight for the phone to call the men in white suits. Greg stops her from making the call and then explains that all he has to do is dictate into his recording machine and whatever character he describes will materialize. He then explains that if he snips off the tape where he had described the character and throws it into the fire, the character will be uncreated. Remember, if you're going to get rid of somebody, always burn the evidence. Victoria tries to leave, but Greg locks her in so that he can do a demonstration. He picks up the dictation machine and describes the woman from before, Mary, as Victoria pickpockets the key and opens the office door. Then, through the open doorway, Mary arrives. Naturally, Victoria reacts with disbelief, convinced that it was all some kind of magic trick designed to gaslight her into an insane asylum so that Greg could take everything and run off with his mistress. That's why people become magicians. Laugh all you want, but they know what's up. To prove what he's saying, Greg takes the newly recorded tape, snips it, and throws it into the fire, even as Mary sadly tells him not to ever bring her back. Then, as advertised, Mary vanishes into thin air. You see, I can still get my cliches right from time to time. Greg goes to embrace Victoria, and she once again steals the key. Then, as he monologues, she manages to escape the office, proclaiming she still plans to have him committed. As a result, Greg wills a giant elephant into existence, blocking her exit from the house. Victoria comes back in and promises not to leave, so Greg snips the tape and does away with the elephant in the room. However, she still wants to put her husband away.
You are stark, staring, raving mad.
You shouldn't say those kind of things, Victoria.
So, with a shrug, Greg reveals a hidden wall safe with a number of envelopes in it, including one labeled Victoria West. Inside the envelope is a long strip of tape, and Greg gives her an ultimatum. Either she lets it all go, or he throws the envelope into the fire.
Cast it into the fire!
Sadly, he realizes it's all his fault for giving her too much will, and unable to really blame her for standing up for herself, he decides to put the envelope back in the safe, come what may. However, Victoria, still unconvinced that any of this is real, snatches the envelope and throws it into the fire. As it burns, she starts to feel funny and disappears.
You don't mean that you were telling me the truth? You were right.
Greg goes back to the recorder and starts to describe Victoria, but changes his mind, instead opting to describe Mary, only this time she's Mary West, his new wife. She appears, and Rod Serling starts his closing monologue. Greg, though, will have none of that, tells Rod to be quiet, and then takes out an envelope with Rod Serling on it and tosses it into the fire, erasing our narrator from existence. This is yet another lighthearted episode, but it's one of the better ones. Maybe I'm biased because I'm a writer and love the wish fulfillment aspect of creating reality out of one's own imagination, or maybe it's just that this episode is once again written by the always brilliant Richard Matheson. Either way, I think it takes the season out on a high note. And that's all I have on The Mighty Casey and a World of His Own. Now, as always, do all those YouTubey things. Check out my Patreon. Yeah, do it. Check out my Patreon. Just check it out. And all that other good stuff. But until next time, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
Alive, real flesh and blood man. And I created him.